Hello and welcome to the Swim Brief. I am Chris DeSantis, and I am joined, as I frequently am, by the deputy water whisperer himself, Joel Rawlings. Joel, how are you?
I'm well, thanks. How are you?
Are you enjoying your new title, Deputy Water Whisperer?
I'm going to grow into it. I hope someday. That'll be awesome resume material for me.
Well, hopefully grow into it before you die, all right? Just,
Yeah, that's how they recognize everyone. You got to wait until they're dead, and you're like, he wasn't that bad of a guy.
you know what? Joel actually knew a few things. Well, and they'll have this podcast to listen to. These podcasts are forever, which is something I remind you of all the time because it takes the pressure off, when you're thinking
Yeah,
about, do I sound like a complete idiot on this podcast? It's just good to remind people that, this will be recorded for posterity and
yeah,
it'll be
yeah,
on the internet and it'll just be there forever.
yeah. No, idiocy forever. That's what we're going for.
Yeah. So today's podcast, we're going to talk about a couple things. First, we're going to give the people what they want. We're going to talk about Summer McIntosh. Especially also so I can make a title for this podcast that's like, why is Summer McIntosh great? And, that'll get twice as many people to listen to it, or maybe 10 times as many people to listen to it. And
Yeah,
then we suck them in with the title, and then, they're listening to us talk over a 400 IM. Maybe you're watching the YouTube version of this. I've got her 400 IM world record queued up. And you and I were texting back a little. Sorry, we're going to do that, and then we're going to talk about positive communication, setting up a season within your team. And I'm gonna give some of my suggestions in that respect, and I hope and expect that you will chime in as well. So let's get into watching this 400 IM, because you and I texted back and forth a bit, as we are wont to do in the last moments before we realize that we have to record another podcast.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And I said, what's like, give me your very small, short take on Summer McIntosh. And I'm going to paraphrase what you said back to me, which was basically, it seemed like, Summer McIntosh is, when you look at the way she swims, there's not like one big standout thing. It's that she does a lot of things pretty well, right? She basically,
Yeah. So
without, yeah, go ahead.
I boil it down even simpler now because I've had time to refine it down to two words. All right, are you ready?
Yes.
Well coached. There you go.
Well coached. Let's talk about why she's well coached. And as I said, I'm for the YouTube version of this, I'm going to pull up some footage and run a bit of footage that I got
Yeah.
from Social Kick, actually another podcast that appears to have a video of the 400 IM that has 56,000 views on YouTube. So we're going to piggyback off of that and show some of the video and give them credit where credit is due, and talk about some of the things that you're seeing that make you boil it down to well coached.
Yeah, yeah. There we go.
So just as I cue this video up, where do you start with that?
I guess while we're waiting here for a second, I was thinking about and this is a different angle. I saw the one on Swim Swam, which is a lower, flatter angle. So I didn't get as much detail as this will be. So it'll be a lot more interesting, I think, to watch this version. Because the first one I watched a couple of times, and I thought about, getting the tempo watch out and stuff. But what I thought is, like, when I was ever at a swim meet watching kids swim, it was like I hated having my watch on where I was like sitting there watching the whole time. The numbers go by and kind of missing the swim. And the first thing I'm kind of looking at her swim is just the flow of that stroke and the insane tempo that it is. Well, not insane, obviously she can do it. So it's a possibility. Right. And that's the cool thing is when you see these elite athletes, the realms of possibility, the idea that, again, here's a person who's, just doing something that's pretty unique as far as the tempo goes. You look at the cycle rate, how quick it is. But when I'm looking at a swim, especially on the start of the IM and the fly, you're kind of looking for like how much of this is going to be wasted movement, how much of it is good, like, I don't know a better word for it than connection or engagement with the water, where they're holding the water. So that mystical kind of feel for the water is going to be different for each person. Again, these are other obviously elite level athletes that she's racing against. And so what I'm interested in is the cadence and the tempo that each person has in their stroke. And I always kind of wonder, how much of human gait is just natural, how much of it is trained into an efficient movement, that, you're kind of trying to tie in heart rate, breathing, but also making sure that you have contact with the water, you're not over swimming that race. And you see already she's pulled ahead of everyone. And on this pause that you have right here, that the butterfly on her stroke is moving forward so well. You see
Right.
the splash pattern is striking and it's moving forward. And so what I'm thinking here is kind of like that idea of like a skipping stone, the idea of like her center of buoyancy up her chest is just kind of bouncing on the water, rebounding off the water. So it's kind of loading, unloading, loading, unloading energy. And right now where you've paused it again, so that the center of buoyancy is down, the center of mass is slightly elevated above that, but that connection from the spine, the lower back muscles, all those deep internal core muscles through, kind of keeping that pressure going down. And so you think about kind of how she's striking the water. It's kind of like a landing area from armpits to chin area, where she's hitting the water and then rebounding against the water. And so it's kind of, again, loading up energy into that center of buoyancy. And then as that rebounds back up, the center of mass drives into it. So it's not so much like kicking forward as kind of like bouncing and keep on pushing that ball forward. And the thing that really struck me is kind of, it reminded me a lot of like Summer Sanders back in the day. So that's, the old school swimming is on her breath. You can see how that line length doesn't really change. She stays. That's a great stopping point right there.
Yeah.
Would be, and so obviously if you're just listening to the podcast, the idea of just watching how she swims, if you look at the back of her neck to the top of her head, usually at a point in the fly, like people start getting fatigued, that line increases. And so that I guess we call it like a break in the line, or that bend in the line, where they get the air coming in. It shortens the line length so much that the stroke starts to drop in the water. They start landing the water harder. So I said like 2-3 cycles back how she's like a skipping stone. At this point, if all of a sudden she's kind of pushing the chin forward and the neck is, in a sense, that broken line length shortens, drag is going to increase because drag is going to be diffused across the line length. But also what will happen on that is the balance shifts backwards. Thinking again, that center buoyancy that she's bouncing on is also kind of the teeter point of that line. And so by bringing the head position up and back, usually what happens is the swimmer actually starts to fall down in the water. The hips start to go. And it looks, if you're just kind of watching a race and you're thinking about kind of like old paradigm of like, leg propulsion, things like that, it looks like they're losing their kick. But a lot of times what's happened is actually they started tipping back too much on that line, and is putting too much pressure on the kick. And so because even on her breath, she's staying so far forward over that tipping point. That tipping point, again, being the center of buoyancy in the lungs. Every stroke is just lunging forward and accelerating forward rather than dropping down in the water. So again, it'd be like comparing a stone skipping across the water versus just dropping a stone in the water. And the splash signature kind of shows that too. A skipping stone, obviously, it looks a lot different than like a bowling ball falling into a pool. And so again, she just maintains this tempo so well. And I think, again, because she's able to keep her line length and keep balanced and keep basically, especially that line length from, I would say, like from the ears until the shoulders, the distance from there, I think, is really key for her.
Yeah, I went back on the video and stopped a little bit because I noticed something as you were talking about summer swimming. I mean, it's always worth it to watch a real race versus somebody race in isolation, because the first time that I watched this, I was just focused on summer, right? And I actually, like, for instance, this butterfly, I think, if swimming were like a judged sport like diving, I'm not sure this butterfly would get a 10 out of 10. I'd probably give it like a 7 or 8 out of 10. Watched in isolation, like it can look a little bit stiff. Like there's not like that fluidity of movement. But when you watch the other swimmers in the race with her, you like, it completely changes that. For me, it completely changed that impression, because I went, oh my God, they're stopping at so many moments and she's not. So my mind is telling me like, oh, it's stiff, it's stiff, it's stiff. And then I watch somebody else swimming and I go, oh, no. This is flowing. Like this is actually, there's actually is an economy of movement, I think.
Exactly. That's
that
a
you
good phrase
referenced
for
here. right? In terms of what she's putting into it. And I went back on the video a little bit because we got some freeze
Right.
frames and some other people breathing, and you can see the difference in
Yeah.
terms of like how they, in order to breathe, they have pulled their head just like far more out of, I don't know, for lack of a better term, alignment with the rest of their spine in order to complete that. And then the downstream of that is that they're the rest of what they're doing, just the connection is kind of broken through the body. So it makes it a lot harder for them to keep transferring energy from one part of the
Exactly.
stroke to the other one. And
Right, and
it
that's
is
a
a pretty
great point
stark
you stopped
difference.
on right there. Yeah,
Yeah.
the woman in the white cap above on the screen. Again, as soon as she's breathing like this, the head is tilted back a little bit, and you see how all of a sudden, just that moment crushes the tempo. And with any kind of a distance swim and a 400 IM kind of a distance swim, the maintenance of the cycle rate is going to be key. You know, you think about it in the sport of cycling, for instance, they have a cadence they try to set up, and they try to maintain that cadence, and that's like, again, to keep the heart rate low and keep the lactate production from, you know, spiking up too much. Again, she's able to keep the cycle rate going. And the backstroke, as she went into this, I saw her previous swim where she was just off the record, and I really love, again, the economy of motion, and how she seems to have great contact with the water. And I really thought that, if anything, that for her to get faster is going to be on the breaststroke end, because I think, compared to, like, if you look at Hosu's record swim, like the breaststroke was the biggest difference. But in her backstroke, I mean, this is the one she actually picked up a lot of ground on from her previous swim. And as I was watching this, I had a different angle on my first watch, but if you watch on the second 50, something goes on a little bit, I think, with the left arm. And all of a sudden, like, I think in about 8 more strokes from this here, all of a sudden it kind of just, that there's a little bit of a wave that kind of comes into the stroke, and a little bit of a bounce that comes into the stroke, where she just kind of starts to lose a bit of contact with the water. Um, and so, again, you know, she's going so fast. It's like you can't, picking nits here as far as looking for little things that go. But again, you see you see the splash and the character of that changes, and that kind of bounce that comes into it. And what I've always thought about within the IM is, anytime they're going from short axis to long axis, is there's a change in the nervous system. Obviously, you're going from the short axis, where you're driving that center of buoyancy is the engine of the stroke, you know, that up and down motion, and then driving with the center of mass behind that. And that's what I think is the cool thing about the short axis strokes, as we mentioned earlier, that breath all of a sudden, because it's the breathing is going to throw off. I mean, just the amount of oxygen you have in your lungs is going to change, you know, where you're floating in the water, but also how you're breathing is going to change on how that weight is distributed. So it's so easy to everything to fall apart. And then you go on from that into a long axis stroke, especially flipping over on your back, where the vestibular system is going to be challenged. Usually you see, like, on that fly to back, that first 25 meters is kind of where things fall apart for people. But she was able to maintain that really well. And that's why I kind of go back to the, well coached, as being the main principle. Then
Well,
going on
so let me
to,
ask you.
I'm
Sorry,
sorry.
let me ask you about
Yeah.
that. It's my job to stop this train every now
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
then
Yeah. Yeah. Sorry,
and
I
force
go
you to
too fast.
offload some passengers. But what makes you say? And by the way, we should mention Brent Arkey is her coach down in Sarasota. So she represents Canada internationally, as I understand it. Um, COVID was something that prompted her to go down to Sarasota in the first place to train, because it was just nigh impossible to practice in Canada during COVID. So she was sort of one of those Florida refugees, swimming refugees, that went down to train in Florida, and she just really hit it off with Coach Arkey down there, and decided that that was the place where she just wanted to train full time. So what makes you say, sometimes I think people who are, swim really well, as you say, like have a good feel for the water, that stuff can get associated with, well, that's just like, that's just a great athlete. Like, coaching doesn't have that much to do with it. What are you seeing in the way that she's swimming that goes, okay, this is a great athlete. This is somebody with exceptional ability. but there's been some coaching that has influenced what she's doing.
The things that kind of right away I was thinking that with on the butterfly, like you said, usually I think like especially for I am that they're more of a kind of a flowing kind of stroke, looking kind of at the lower back as kind of a transmission point to that wave. So from the top, of like the sternum down to the hip, you get a flowing motion through that, and she's it doesn't flow like it normally I would think of in a 4IM. But she's able to stay so balanced, and so that I think is obviously her feel for the water and able to kind of go. But obviously that comes a lot from training and doing like long course meter swims, where you keep on doing that repetition of learning how to be the most economical with that motion.
Right.
And that's the thing is obviously there's moments within that training program where she's able to kind of feel that alignment, feeling that balance, and feeling that happening. So it's not just, hey, let's just go grind, and then whatever comes out of this lane is going to be what we're going to race with. It's like there's actual intention put into a lot of her swims. And so I think a lot of what you're saying with the feel, that goes back to like, what's going on 6, 7, 8 years old, and that's why, age group coaches are so valuable as far as creating those opportunities for learning these things that you really can't see, when it's the final product, but you can see it if it wasn't taken care of. It's kind of like the shadows that kind of come from like bad experiences in the water. So everything in swimming, I think, is built around that breathing pattern. Especially again, we talk about short axis strokes. Everything is built around that breathing pattern. So if there's something that they haven't learned early on, it's like building something on clay. It's going to come apart at some point. And for her to be able to kind of stay balanced like she does, it's just amazing. But yeah, you just see everything, the turns, everything is so well done.
Yeah, and I mean, I remember the first time that I had heard of her, and it was at the 2021 Olympics. I think she was in a preliminary heat of the 400 with Ledecky, and so I was watching the race, and just there was like a 14-year-old girl from Canada that was just out there winging it with Katie Ledecky in the prelims of the Olympic, and I was like, who is that? And she just was, you can tell. I would urge everybody, go back and watch some of the footage of Summer McIntosh swimming in the 2021 Olympics. She was an exceptional swimmer even at that time, but you can see a lot of progress since then. So right. I think that's probably the easiest way I might explain well coached, is just like I believe that for an athlete to make progress like that, that's very, 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 very hard to do in isolation. Somebody helps you do that.
Right.
And it's obvious that somebody has really, really helped her in that time go from, being an exceptional 14, I think she was 14 at that time, maybe just turned 15, exceptional 14-year-old to, continuing, like she's on a normal progression actually for a swimmer that age. It's just her progression from where she was. Her progression was to 425 in the 400 IM.
Right.
And that is rare, obviously. In fact, it's only been done once.
I think one of the things too is what you're saying about this is you kind of, if we take the time out of that, take that as a world record swim out of this equation. And I think so many coaches are caught into the outcome where this is fast, therefore everything here is good, and versus what is good? What are the mechanisms in there that are good? What are the processes that are going on that we can get? Again, I'll never coach a kid that can go this fast, but what are some of the things that we can take away from this? And that's why I'm kind of pointing out the idea of that, using your center buoyancy like that, using your line length like that and again, trying to create that economy of motion. And again, you can have all sorts of different strokes. There's no perfect stroke design, except when it comes to each individual athlete. I mean, everyone's forearm length is going to be different. So their ability to hold the wire is going to be different. I see, like, I'll scroll through some of the social media feeds. They'll be like, some clinic, we're going to show you the exact angle that you're supposed to hold the water. It's like, well, yeah, whatever athlete that you highlighted, that's the angle you're supposed to do. I remember when I swam when I was really young. Shane Gould, what was, she had these film loops that our swim coach would show us, and she had like a 2-beat and a 4-beat crossover kick. And you probably haven't heard of the crossover kick because it wasn't a real thing. But coach is like, oh, well, this is what made her great. She had a 4-beat crossover kick.
And let's teach everybody to do a crossover kick now.
And I couldn't do it. It freaking drove me out of the sport for a while. I'm just like, well, I can't be any good. I can't do that. And the cool thing is I got to meet Shane years later, and she was like, yeah, I have no idea. That was something that kind of, when I switched training groups, that was something that I introduced because, I was told to do X, Y, and Z, and I couldn't do that. And that was like an outcome. So it was more like an outcome versus what the actual cause of her going fast was. And so the same thing here, if we kind of break down the idea, like what are some things that the mere mortals can take away from this swim, is again, just how she's able to stay so balanced, keep her tempo going. When we went into looking at her strokes like this, again, the gait pattern, I always kind of wonder, like, is this just an offshoot of what she naturally is, versus is this something that's been trained into a certain level? So like, do we have like a certain gait that we are just born with and we can go plus or minus 10% of that? Or is that something that's really trainable to the point where obviously you get a swim that's incredible like this?
Yeah, I mean, I even watched this again. I watched this freestyle and watched in isolation. It can look a little short and choppy, and like not. It's not aesthetically exactly what I don't know what you would.
I love it though.
Yeah, no,
I
me
think
too.
amazing.
That's the thing.
Yeah.
It's like it's not winning the aesthetics contest, but maybe it should be winning the aesthetics contest. Is I kind of like the argument I'm trying to make here. I'm trying not to sound like I'm negative about it. You can just like, it's probably one of the best illustrations, I would say, of the parts of it that look choppy. You can see that when her hand enters the water, like she's doing something, like, and her whole, she's got everything chained from the hips outwards. And we talked with Juka Shemeka about that. Like, she's got all the muscles engaged in doing what she's doing. When that hand hits the water, like, she is absolutely ripping. And she's doing
what I think of is like
hard for a whole 100 at the end of a 400 IM.
Yeah, I was on a flight, and so I watched the movie. Was it Ford versus Ferrari? It was like one of those Matt Damon movie kind of things. And the idea of like the Ferrari being like an aesthetically beautiful car, and the Ford Mustang just being just its power. And so when I'm looking at this swim, we didn't really talk much about the breaststroke, but the same thing here is like she comes really pretty high out of the water. But again, that first stroke off the wall, she gets a little bit high, but then she bounces out pretty quick. But again, that height, it's so hard to get that high out of the water that it takes a lot of energy, but it kind of creates that potential energy where she's up pretty tall above her center of mass, that when she drives forward, she gets a lot of power into that stroke, and she's able to get a lot of distance to the stroke because of how she's able to drive off the hips. So it's not like her kick doing the damage, kind of like we talked about the fly. It's not the kick doing the damage so much as what she's able to do from the hips of using that as like a platform to dive off of and spring into the next stroke. And again, watching the freestyle, watching again at the hips and the lower back up on top of the water. I mean, again, she's got such a great line in the water that every little impulse of energy is putting into that stroke. Like you said, it's like, it's like a street fight. Every bit of energy is going into a punch. It's not going into stabilizing. It's not going into holding her above water. It's going into momentum towards that wall. And that's why I think it's pretty exciting to watch. And so the first time I watched it, I think it's like we talked about on our last podcast, the idea to see these NBA guys, they're like, 12th off the bench, like what a stiff. And you see them in real life, and like, this is the fastest, most agile human being I've ever seen. And they're just one of, again, so you watch this first race, you're like, oh, it's a good looking swim. And then you realize, oh my gosh, these are all elite level athletes that she's just destroying, and how fast she's going. And then it becomes like, what's going on here?
Right. Every single person I would gather that she raced in that final at Canadian Nationals is somebody who has been swimming competitively probably for over a decade, and has devoted their lives at this point full time to training for swimming competitions,
Right,
right?
right.
And they're exceptional athletes, and they are doing workouts like you would not believe. And somehow she is, yeah, she's winning by a lot in that race.
Yeah.
And so it's worth doing. I again, credit to her, credit to her coach, Brent Arkey. I even want to give credit to Canada. I do. I'm kind of impressed. I'm a Canadian swimming hater. I think I've given them a hard time, just like I give everybody a hard time. At this point, I should just admit I give everybody a hard
Yeah,
time.
yeah.
That's kind of my thing.
You're a
But
crotchety East Coast dude. Yeah, yeah.
right, no, I'm just a crotchety. I'm just born with that old man get off my lawn energy, and I didn't need to grow into it. So what I will say about Canada is, though, when you look at Canada, a country that has invested a lot in their like swimming infrastructure within the country, right? They have high performance centers and they're paying coaches to coach at the high performance center, and they're trying to like build stuff. The fact that they just sort of went like, oh, well, Summer's happy training in Sarasota. Great, cool. Like, and there wasn't, as far as I can tell, there wasn't some high pressure campaign within Canada to go like, well, we got to get her back, training in Toronto or whatever. And it just said like, hey, here's a teenage kid who seems to be real happy swimming down in Florida. Why don't we just let her be happy and see what
Well,
happens? And
I'm
this is
glad
what
I'm
you
the
get.
counterbalance. I'm the counterbalance to you because I love Canadian swimming. I think the past couple Olympics, they've been amazing how much they've been doing and how much they've been progressing. And I remember, this is way back, in the 90s when I coached at Texas Christian University. We would recruit Canadians all the time, and I just loved working with them. And so I got to kind of, I didn't really know much about the system and the carding system and things like that, and just how their system has been evolving and how much they seem to really invest in the coaches. I think is just amazing, and I like watching what they're doing on the international level, and I like watching what they're doing at the Olympic level for sure. I mean, it's been pretty cool what they've been doing in the past. I'm sure much farther than 8 years, but I'm just thinking in my recent memory, the past 8 years have been pretty spectacular.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree with you. There were some really lean years for Canadian swimming,
Sure.
especially the years that I started paying attention. I mean, I started paying attention in the late 90s and then into the 2000s. If you look back, those were not the good years. Those were not Victor Davis and Mark Tewksbury years. Those were like Curtis Myden maybe making it, contending for a medal or something. Maybe Marianne Limpert, making her way in there. But there was a lot of really lean years there for Canada. And right, this is not a fluke. They have been swimming very well internationally for a country their size, where nobody basically gets to swim outdoors, right? Which is the real fun part. They've been doing extremely well.
Yeah.
I totally agree. All right. Well, let's pivot to talk about season long communication. And you gave me this prompt, and what it made me think of
Yeah.
is in the last season that I coached at Wahoo. So this is the season starting in September 2022. I have been working over the years on answering some of what you asked, which is like, how do you sort of set up some things communication wise? And I think probably people are thinking about this because they're transitioning to long course. You have an opportunity to reset the deck a little bit, or maybe you're already looking towards, using some of this time period to think about how you're going to introduce the season that starts for a lot of people in August, September of this year. So I thought I would actually, I pulled up my document. I have it in the background. I'm going to read some pieces of it and just sort of explain some of what I end up thinking around this, because, and of course, I've navigated away from the window. Oh, it's because I made the big Summer McIntosh video. So the idea with some of this is, of course, this is a document. It's about 2 pages. I sent it out, in emails. Did I really believe that a lot of the parents of kids that I coach or kids that I coach would sit down and carefully read 2 pages of something I sent in an email. Absolutely not. And this was actually one of the big takeaways I had from your fellow Wisconsinite, Brent Bach, watching him present at the Galveston Coaches Clinic, because I thought the core of one of the big core things I took away from listening to Brent is that he had communicated, in my opinion, at least from listening to his presentation, it sounded as if he had communicated really positively with the swimmers and parents and everybody involved, coaches on his team, that he had purposefully set stuff up, and I could tell like the progression that he had worked through to get to some of the places he was right now. He communicated positive values so that people always had an idea, even if there wasn't, a specific rule written going, you should cheer for, if you're on the A relay, you should cheer for the B relay. I don't think he has that written out somewhere, but people know that they're going to do that because other stuff has been communicated, like, hey, we're going to cheer for everybody on the team, or we're going to lift this piece of it. I can't even paraphrase what he did, and it'd be maybe we can get Brent on here and get him to open up. Maybe not. But I think where I'm headed with that is, I asked him, I said, hey, what is your preferred mode of communicating all of this? Right? Because, we hear, like, we think about, oh, we're going to send emails. Are we going to hold a meeting? Are we going to say something at practice? I know there's people who've used podcasting, right, to communicate. And I did think about that, because when I was coaching on the team, there were swimmers that I coached that listened to the podcast. So, I was like making these with the idea that somebody that I coached would actually listen to it. What do I want to put into it? And he said to me, honestly, person to person. So, what I focus on are my in-person interactions with the coaches that I've hired, the swimmers that I've coached, and the parents of people that, the parents of swimmers that I've coached. And by just staying focused on that piece of it, where people are most likely to actually hear you, then that lays the groundwork for everything else. So I say, like, hey, I wrote all this out, I sent it in an email. But really, for me, it was less about sending it out in an email, or we had a kickoff meeting at the beginning of the year with parents where I got to communicate some of this to them. But really, the idea is get yourself organized around what you want to communicate, so that when you're in those one-to-one interactions, when you're in those like conversations with people, you're not coming up with it on the fly, right? You have an idea somewhere of what it is. So that's my long preamble into it. Some of the stuff. So let me, do you have any questions before I start based on all the things I just said?
No, I think it's good. I think definitely, like what you said, is like Elmbrook Swim Club in Wisconsin. If you ever want to watch how things are done really well, I think that's the one to go to. And kind of the idea that you're getting there is not so much like you're going to get laden down with rules, so much as you're kind of principle driven. That, we do these things because we're good people. We do this because we're good people. And kind of also what you're saying with the idea of emails is parents are always like, I don't have time, I don't have this, but taking those moments that you can at least have that face-to-face time with the parent. So when they read the email, I think a lot of times we whatever our emotion is going into that email is the emotion we're going to get out of that email. So if I go in thinking, Chris is crotchety, I'm going to be like, this email is Chris being even more crotchety, versus like, right, I've seen him, he actually does care about my child. And hopefully, like, again, they do pause, where if they misread something, they'll ask a follow-up question to it. But it's hard to like get people down. And I think one of the things, like you're saying, is the idea that if you have at least the idea where you're at of what you want to start to communicate at a certain point in the season, if you have this list that you're kind of going to go into, that every chance that you get to see a parent, you kind of just get in there and give them like 2-3 seconds, just again, so that they know your personality, they know the intention behind what you're doing is positive, and that if there is a question, they can come to you. And so that, again, if they hit something that might come off like, is this him being sarcastic or being rude, or is this just this, he didn't really type it as well as he could have, because
Right.
again, speed is essential. If you, a 2-3 page document, they're like, yeah, it's too much, I can't.
Yeah. So first, I wrote an introduction to this, and that's your opportunity, I think, to broadly define, you know, for instance, this is for a specific group. So, if people are joining this group, you want to give them an idea of like, what are they signing up for? We would talk about this all the time on Wahoo's because um, we had moments where we were like, we didn't do a very good job communicating this, in the sense that there would be a kid who would find their way into, I had this what was called the high school group, and then eventually the senior group. It was the mainly high school age kids, some middle schoolers, and less training than our national squad, and a bit, like performance wise, it was lower than the national squad. And there are people who'd sign up for it who, like, I think part of the idea was we were a pathway for kids that hadn't just like focused on the sport of swimming from age 8 onwards, who wanted to swim and wanted to swim competitively. And so we would get people in the group who had never, like, I every year had kids in the group that had never swam year round, right? This is their first experience. And where I'm getting to is, and Coach Jake would always say this, like, there's some parent, like, they have no idea what year round swimming or being in this group entails. And all of a sudden their kid has been signed up for the second highest group on one of the top swim clubs in America. And these practices are hard, right? And you can see a kid just like their head is swirling. They're like, oh, I thought I was just going to come and swim back and forth a little bit, and now, like, we're doing 4100s, and I'm expected to keep moving. So just the idea of introduce to people like what it is they're signing up for. And in that sense, I built this around saying this is a group for high school kids mainly, and we're going to train to be good at swims at events that you race in high school swimming, right? So even though we're not a high school swim team, the focus will be that you could show up to your high school dual meet and coach could put you in any 100 of stroke, a 50, 100, 200, or a 500 free, or a 200 IM, right? All the potential events that you could be doing in a high school swim team. That practice was designed to facilitate a transition between groups at Jersey Wahoo, so that we had a national group that practiced more, that had harder practices, but that if you trained at the top end of this, then it was possible to transition from one to another. So give people something out on the other end to transition to. And then finally, that this is a group for kids that are in high school that first want to be on their high school swim teams and maybe practice with their high school swim teams. And also for kids who want to do other sports, right? So this is actually a year-round swimming option for, I had kids that ran cross country and track, I had kids that played volleyball, I had kids that played soccer. So kids who are playing other sports for their high school team, that this could be a place where you could do something with your swimming year round, but you didn't necessarily have to have swimming as the only thing you were doing. So letting people know on the front end, like, who is this for, right? I think was an important part of communicating positively to them on the front end, and establishing, like, with the kids in the group, like, hey, you're in the right place. This is what this is, and getting them to identify that they were in the right place. Because I think, if we go back to the Summer McIntosh thing, you have somebody who, you know is thriving because she's identified, hey, this is the place I want to be. This is not necessarily what I was always destined to. I didn't grow up in Sarasota, Florida, right? But this is the place I want to be, and I'm in the right place, and everything works from that point.
So I think if I kind of boil it down, you kind of like basically the idea is you're communicating, the present and then possibilities for future, and then also letting them know that this is a good spot to be in. So the idea that right now, this is the expectations, this is where you're fitting in really well. These are the options you have on the program. And yeah, you could do, mornings and afternoons, and that's not impossible, because I think sometimes explaining to parents that aren't part of a swimming culture, like twice a day, that's ridiculous. Starting to do that, but also saying that it's okay to be where you're at. And I think that's the thing sometimes it gets overlooked, the idea we've talked about in the past of never stopping for a moment and appreciating the accomplishment you have. It's like, you're doing really well. You're swimming 2 hours a night. This is fantastic versus, what the rest of the world is even doing. I remember at Elmbrook Swim Club, not to go back too much in this and throw too many
Please, as
accolades
much.
away.
Yeah.
Yeah, is the previous coach there, he would every now and then stop and really comment on a 28.8 50-yard freestyle swimmer and be like, you know what, you're going to do a great job on, you've got relay options when you get to high school. It's going to be great. And he's like, and he was from California originally. Well, he worked in California for a while, and he would point out that, to be a beach lifeguard, to be able to do a 202 minutes, that's the elite of the elite. And you're well beyond that. And so kind of the idea of like, let's not always compare ourselves to Summer, or we once talked about Surhoff years back, always comparing himself to Phelps. It's good where you're at. And so the idea that you're communicating again is you're good where you're at, you're doing well. If you want to do something this direction, you can do something this direction, you can. But right now you're in a good spot, and kind of opening that door. And the thought I have is the first question I would have as a coach if I were starting a team up is, we've got our high school group because we need the cash, we need the revenue, we need a group someplace to go, and we need the elite group. What happens when you get the 6'8" former basketball player comes in, he's all of a sudden just goes 44 in the 100-yard freestyle, and he's doing that group. And meanwhile, you've got your national team over there, and those guys are like, that's working for him. Why am I over here, twice a day, every day, and I can't even go 48?
Right.
So what's the conversation like on that end, on the other end too, when all of a sudden, someone experiences success like that, and you're like, how do you go, hey, this is where you're supposed to be?
I mean, we dealt with this even last year in this group because there was a swimmer who just did exceptionally. She, when I started coaching it, she was a 109 in yards, 100 butterfly. And within 18 months, she went from that to a 57, and she qualified for futures, right? Which was something she was training in this group, and I was less than half of our national squad had qualified for futures. So, on a performance level, at least if you just took one event, she could say, like, I'm better than half the kids in the next group. Now, we didn't really find, I think maybe this is a cultural piece to be studied, and we could take this as a real positive. We didn't run into any kids that went, oh, well, that's working down there, I would like to join this group that trains less. I always found that kids within our culture always wanted to go up, and she very quickly wanted to go up. And because she was doing the same math that I just did, that goes like, hey, I'm faster than half these kids, why am I not up in that group? And me being the curmudgeonly old coach that I am, I was pretty hard on her. If I'm being honest, I mean, I was pretty hard on her in the sense that I said, well, it's not just about. We had always established that performance was a factor in what group you trained in, but that there were actually there were three basic factors. The first one being coachability. So, this one was probably the most subjective, but the idea that you were somebody who would come to practice and be open to being coached, right? That you were, that when, when you got information that helped that helped you to move forward in your swimming, that you were taking it on board, that you were trying things, that you were responsive, that you were giving information back, valuable feedback back to the coach about what you were trying to do. And the second one being consistency in terms of attendance. So, as you said, like one of the things that differentiated the different groups within the team, right, was how often they practiced. So if a kid, we had 10 hours of practice a week, and the national squad, I think, if you look at just the swimming piece, it was a jump to, I think, gosh, I don't even remember off the top of my head, but it's probably somewhere between 16 and 18 hours of swimming. So one of the things I would say to any kid that said like, hey, I would like to move up like this, I said, well, are you coming to all 10 hours of what we have? Because why do you think it's best for you to train 18 hours when you're not making it to 10 hours of training that you're being offered right now? Like, so, like, you're asking for more, but are you making full use of what you have right now? It's sort of like the basics of, your kid has a third of dinner left on their plate and they're like, I'm ready for seconds. You go, no, finish what you've already taken first, and then you can have seconds, right? You want more training, then take on board what you've got, and then performance as a third factor. So I said, like, no doubt you're there performance wise. Congratulations. I hope, you're really proud of yourself for having done that. And but I was really, really hard on the other two factors, because I said all of this has to be in place for you to move up. And she did move up over the summer, probably 3 or 4 months after achieving the qualifying time. And she made an awesome transition to the next group. I would say she is above average in terms of attendance and consistency and coachability into that new group. So, and that was, I guess, probably a fourth subjective factor is like, hey, it's a slam dunk. If you can convince us that moving you up will not only be the best for you, but will be the best for the team, like you're going to make the team better by coming up there, then that's an easy decision for us. And I think that's what happened in the end. She's going to go swim at Johns Hopkins next year. So I'm super, as her former coach, like I'm super excited, because, 10900 butterflyer, I think probably she was not thinking about swimming in college, and now she's going to be swimming at one of the best colleges in America. So
I think one of the really important things that you brought up there, and you just kind of threw it in at the end, is also what it does for the team. I think sometimes, as we're mentioning, like the summer swim and things like that, we're always like so much outcome based. Like this is a fast swim, therefore everything is great. This is the end of the season. You had a great end of the season meet, therefore the season was great. Everything is always outcome. And starting it off again when they're in your group, where it's an introductory kind of group in a sense, because they're coming in rather late to the sport relative to other people. The idea of creating that outline of these are the criteria. Swimming fast is part of the outcome, but it's not one of the criteria for, it's just, like, what are the things leading up to that? So like you said, again, how coachable are they? And I think especially at an introductory level, you can start to, let the parents know that this is what we're looking to do. We're creating something long-term. The idea that you're coachable, you're not an automaton, you're not a lapdog, you're someone that can take information, processes it, adapt it. Again, not just being obedient, kind of the 80s model of just shut up and swim kind of a thing. But then also adherence to the exercise program, adherence and trainability are obviously it's the biggest component in any endurance sport or any activity. Again, if you want to get better, you have to have, for adaptation to occur, there has to be adherence like that. What the individual needs also, again, there's a lot of things that go into all sports and also their whole life. And I think that's the part I like when we talk, is the idea that it's not just about, it can't just be about the exercise. It can't just be about the bout of training. It has to be about the recovery as well. And that recovery is based on what they're doing for the remaining 22 hours out of the day, sleep, eat, things like that, and how much of these other things impact one another. Is your training going to impact you to the point where you're no longer able to do, again, your other sport or have relationships or things like that? Or are these negative relationships impacting your trainability? And so the last part you brought up, though, at the end there, how does this help the team? And I think that's the big thing. That was like when I was a college coach, that was the part I would notice on some programs where kids just didn't have that. They're like, this is an individual sport. It's about what I'm going to do right now. And some kids, when they come out of a program, really excelled. And I think it's because they understood the bigger picture. They understood I'm a part of something bigger than just my swim right here. My swim, not just at the meet, impacts the outcome of the score. My swim, my energy impacts how other people swim at the meet, but also every day in practice. And that was what we always harped on my program, is the idea that everything you do, bringing in, you can't always be like, I'm so excited to swim this morning. It's not going to happen. But if you're there, that's a big part. And if you're there and you can at least encourage someone else, even though you don't feel it, that's going to make everyone around you better. And then it becomes that ball rolling where, again, you've got something going. And so when we take apart programs, when we look apart at programs, like this summer swim, again, was anything spectacular? It was like lots of little things were. That was we're always looking for like, well, what's the one vitamin I need? Oh, more B12, more magnesium. We're looking for the one thing. Like, what's the hack? What's the thing? And then you can put that on your trailer. It's the little things. Like you go to a program and all of a sudden the kids are there exactly like 5 minutes early and they're putting in lane lines and the coach hasn't said a thing yet. You're like, this obviously is amazing, because what went into them just putting lane lines on in time is a daily thing. As soon as something like that, there's no momentum for something like that to happen. That is a constant pushing that ball up the hill. And that coach behind it is the force behind it. And those kids kind of interacting and having fun and talking with another. There's something going on behind that. And that's the thing I always kind of look at, much like the swim we talked about today. Or what are all these little things that just aren't natural, that you don't want to do, but they're doing, and they're figuring out a way to have fun with it. Or
this is another point. This was actually made in a completely way. You remind me of it as you talk about this, that came out of the Houston Coaches Clinic. Julie Bachman, who is the executive director of Gulf Swimming, said to the group, we were about to get a presentation basically on some business and negotiation skills for coaches. And one of the things she said is like, just so coaches understand, you guys are the best salesmen in the world. And, like there's a little grumble in the crowd. And she said, no, seriously, like, do you understand you convince high school kids on a routine basis to get out of bed at 4 something in the morning and come over and do the hardest swim practice of their lives? Like, that is a hard sales job, but you just sort of like, you do it routinely over and over and over again. You convince kids that like, this is a good idea. You convince parents to spend money on that, right? Like when you just isolate it on its own, I think like coaches should feel empowered by this a little bit. Like you are really, you're really good. And this sort of leads me into the next section, because the next thing that I do is, and I think this is a missed opportunity in communicating a lot, was I just have short sections on all the people that are going to be coaching the group. Just introduce all the people that are going to be coaching the group. Because again, when you think about that scenario I just said, like, and you even think back to your own life, the moments where, you did something that if viewed in isolation seemed totally unpleasant, but you did it anyway. I bet you one of the biggest reasons you did it was the relationship you had with the person you were showing up to meet, at the crack of dawn in the morning. And that's a coach, right? Coaches are what get people to, show up to something, right? Coaches matter a lot. And I think for myself, as I was back coaching this group, first, I knew every year there were going to be people who had no idea. They had no prior knowledge of me whatsoever. So I had a fresh slate to introduce myself, right? And just say like, hey, I'm Chris and this is who I am. And I'm going to be coaching your kid, and have them get to know something about me. And then I thought, over time that, the assistant coaches I had, they were there part-time, so they had less time to form relationships with kids, less time to form relationships with parents. They weren't, communicating with parents really outside of, um, well, they basically weren't responsible for communicating with parents, so parents didn't tend to know them. So I thought it was really important for them to say, for me to say, like, and here's Kim, she's going to be coaching the group too, and here's a little something like to know about her, um, because a lot of the problems that people run into, I think, could be solved by, this is going to sound a little bit like, can't we all just get around a table and resolve our differences? But getting to know another person, that's again what I take out of what uh, Brent said, is, this hard work of getting to know people and having them get to know you, it goes a long way to resolving a lot of differences and preventing a lot of situations where people are going to be communicating negatively. Because I think when people get to that space, it's they get there by filling in a lot of blanks. And if you can put information there instead of giving them a blank space to fill in, then they're going to be lot less likely to get to that place where they're sending you, an angry email that just says, like, you did this and this and this and this and this, and you're terrible, and what are you going to do now? So just be preemptive about introducing yourself, and I think it'll go a long way. And yourself and all the people that are going to be involved.
Yeah, that sounds
Um,
good. Yeah.
yeah, and then we
Yeah.
got into just some basic expectations, and some of this we have been over already. So I guess I'm going to talk more thematically about what's presented in here, and that is going to be go back to some of what I talked about with that um, group moving, but the idea of recognizing, if you've already defined who the people are who are coming, and then you've defined who the people are who are going to be leading the training or whatever, and then you want to start setting some expectations for what's going to happen when when everybody shows up. um I'm thinking as I'm talking about how I want to phrase this piece of it, but the guiding principle was recognizing what do the people who are showing up want to get out of it, and then
Mhm.
those people that we introduce as coaches, what do they want to get out of it, and how much of that do we have in common, and where could we get together and recognize that, something that everybody wants is going to be best for the group, and get people moving in that direction. Because I think, you know, again, you say like swimming can be viewed as an individual sport, so you can have people pulling in their own direction, and they could be saying something like, well, why is it important that I come to practice?
Right.
Like, it's just more lane space for everybody else if I'm not there. And actually making an argument for people that not only is it going to be good for you to come to practice, we want you to come to practice. Um, we have an we've set things up that you're going to come to practice, right? So this whole thing is built around the idea that we make a positive assumption of you having signed up for this, that um, if this is what you're doing as a year-round sport, that you're going to come to all the practices that are offered, because that's what we think is best, and we want the best for you, and that's going to what's going to lead to the results that you want. If you're somebody that is, for instance, playing another sport, that you're going to be, open in communication and say, hey, I'm going to be at soccer on Wednesdays, but you can count on me to be here all the other days, or I'm going to have these conflicts here and there, but otherwise I'm going to be here. And introduce, instead of in this expectations, instead of introducing a bunch of scenarios where it's like, do this or else, the idea being, here's what it looks like to be an excellent member of this group, and actually sell people on a positive vision of what happens when they do that, right? So that if you come up to these standards, you're going to have an even better experience, right? The baseline experience, if you are all over the place and you miss some stuff and you're a human being and this, it's going to be great. But guess what? If you do all the things that are sort of the highest standard of this group, life's going to be even better than that. And so introducing the stuff that I think would be best for a swimmer in the group, that the other coaches would think would be best, the stuff that, you know, you want people to do in the course of the practice, but essentially selling it to them as like, this is good for you if you follow this, versus I think you can often get into, like, with an expectation section, a sort of negative framing of like, do this or else there will be consequences, right? Negative things will even be even worse. And implicitly you're going like, things aren't that great in the first place, but they could be worse, which is not
So
a very
kind of
positive vision.
creating more like what options are versus this or that kind of, again, I think that's one thing that as a swim coach I've done in the past, where I kind of almost like trying to save so much time by like, well, I'm just assuming that everyone here is to get faster. You know, that again, it's more than likely, but again, it's not 100%, and it's good to find out exactly what are you trying to get out of this.
Right.
And from that, it starts to go, well, these are some possibilities, you know, again, that if you do X, Y, and Z, that this could be, but again, it's not setting a goal for them. It's not saying that it's this or else kind of thing. But also I think not having that fear of going, it's okay to not be a part of this program too. You know, these are the expectations we have. And it's, you know, as my wife said, when I wanted to pick up golf once, and she said, well, that's great, then we can just get divorced now rather than having to get divorced later, is the same thing here. It's like, it's better to get the divorce early when you still like each other, you know,
right?
Then all of a sudden this kid's been on your team for a year and has been miserable, and, you know, possibly like just not, you know, you're not seeing the best side of that individual because they don't want to be there, or their expectations weren't this. So again, just taking that extra couple of minutes of laying out what your expectations are for your program. And that program might just be like, listen, if you're here 15 minutes, we want 15 minutes of positivity, we want 15 minutes of energy, we want 15 minutes of all out. And then that's all we want from you. If you can provide that, great, or whatever your expectations are. I just threw that out there just for the hell of it.
Yeah. Well, I'll give you an example of it. Like, one of the things that again, I'm paraphrasing in here, but I cover the idea of, you know, like skill and stroke instruction. And one of the ways I set that up is, listen, if you're coming to practice as an athlete and you're inconsistent, or you're consistent in your attendance of practice, and you're consistent in your completion of, you know, what we've designed as training during practice, then you're going to get skill instruction. So the idea that skill instruction, I even almost started to frame it negatively, skill instruction is not something going to be taken away if you mess up, but that skill instruction is something that you will get if you're fulfilling the sort of basic expectations of the group. And frankly, we'd sort of done the math on the other end. We knew what people were paying to be part of the group. We knew how many hours of training we were offering a year. And I think when we broke it down, it was something like $5 per practice that people were paying to be there. And on that end, I would always say to my assistant coaches, for there to be a designed, coached workout, $5 is cheap, right? They're like, people are getting a great value. And I was not apologetic about telling parents, like, hey, you know, like, you're going to be greeted with a smile, positive attitude, coach is happy to see you, and you're going to get a great training, right?
Yeah.
Now, if you happen to take advantage of that great training, you show up consistently, you do the training consistently, guess what? You're going to get even more. And that is skill instruction. So setting up some of the stuff that you want to do, right? Like, I want to show up to every practice and and teach people how to swim. I think if people have been listening to this podcast and the rapt interest I have, especially like even earlier when you're talking about stuff, like that's what I want to show up and do. But the idea being that I'm not sort of mortgaging the stuff that I want to do on the front end and then hoping that everybody else will pay me back, but actually getting them to meet me one to one and setting that expectation from the very beginning. I found it created more and more kids and families who not only understood what was going on, but like wanted to do that because they're like, well, I see it. I see how it works now. And they would follow that. So you have a smirk on your face as I'm
I was thinking,
telltale Joel Rawlings smirk.
The point I stopped listening was when you said how excited you are about swimming, like even when you're explaining it. So I like, okay, even when I'm explaining, so normally I kill it for everyone, but even my inane dribble is enough that you're actually interested in. So no, I appreciate that. I do. So I'm sorry.
I didn't mean it that way.
Throw you off. Sure. So this is that communication that you're talking about. I understand now. Okay.
Nobody's perfect, Joel. I can only manage so much positive communication that I break.
Yeah, there's only so much pseudo positivity I can give towards you, is what I've read into that now. So luckily, this is time stamped at the moment where Chris lost me. Right. That's all right, though. No, that's good. I think those are all really good points, and I think that really sets up. Again, when you distill a lot of that out, it's just taking that extra time at the beginning to lay out the expectations, whatever it has. And I think that's where a lot of, we've talked about again, where people get burnt out is the times where I felt the most tired is like when my expectations, I think, started to exceed what the expectations might have been of an individual. And that's when you start getting frustrated. Like, why aren't you X, Y, and Z? And then it's, well, they never realized that this was the expectation. And so it's pretty unfair mid-season to start throwing an expectation at them. Like, we have to do more. It's like, I already thought I was doing the maximum. In fact, I've exceeded that. And I think that's, again, boils down to a lot of the conflict that we've seen in coaching is the idea that this basic framework, and that's all it is it's not magic. It's just basic framework of, this is the group. Like you said, this is the group. This is the expectations. These are the coaches. This is what we expect of the coaches. And this is what you're going to get out of this group. And like you said, you boiled it down to, here's the numbers even. You're going to get all of this. Because I think so many times we're trying to justify the one season cost. Well, it looks big. Well, when you break it down to one practice, it's not. Go to gymnastics. Go to some personal fitness group, some kickboxing or Orange Theory or something like that. Check out that difference. And again, I think sometimes parents don't stop and step back and go, like you said, my child is being looked after by an expert, not a volunteer. My child is being cared for their future. And you're already talking about this swimmer going to Johns Hopkins and excited you are about that. And you don't even coach that person anymore. So really the relationship ended, yet you still really are in tune and care. That kind of a thing as a parent, I think when you point it out to them, they're like, here's my checkbook, just whatever number it is, just write it down.
Right.
That's what it should be.
I think that's a good place to bring us to a very important question that has been hanging on the minds of all the listeners of the podcast. And that is, Joel, have you gotten your Magic 5 goggles? And what do you think?
I did get them. I really enjoy them a lot. I've started doing open water swims. I signed up for one of those insanely stupid swims I'm going to do later this summer. And so it's funny because I've got my open water goggles and I call them the Escalades because they just are so gigantic, but they're pretty comfortable in my face. But then if I go to swim practice, I'm wearing those. It's just, go over to the end lane, dude. There's no way you're going to swim in this lane. That you look just ridiculous. We don't even wear a team cap because we don't want anyone associated with this. These goggles I can wear, open water, and I've worn them in the pool a few times. Really good visibility and amazingly comfortable. I've been doing the reverse thing. Like I keep loosening the strap up to the point where I'm like, this has got to be too loose. They're going to fall
no
right
way.
off.
Right.
And they've held. And so again, I think originally when I looked at the price point, I was like, goggles, I'm used to like the Swedes, 250, $5 a pair.
Right.
And they're a lot more comfortable. The visibility is great. And actually, not to sell too much on this, one of the master swimmers I coach, she's on television, a local news person, and she wears them all the time. She said because she leaves there and she'll go to makeup, and she doesn't have the raccoon eyes going on screen.
Right.
That was really affecting her ability to kind of swim because she's like she couldn't go work afterwards, and so she wears them, and it works out really good because they are so comfortable and they don't leave those marks, and you can go back to work and not look like, what have you done? What heroin
Yeah.
den did you just crawl out of?
Yeah. I mean, I got to be on Zoom every day, and I have that same thought every day. I don't know when this is gonna wear off, but every day before I hop into the pool and I put them on, I think, these are way too loose. Like water's gonna
Yeah,
come
yeah,
in my eye. Like it just, 30 years of there's no way you could wear goggles this loosely on your face and
yeah,
not be just like, up to your eyeballs in water, but then they never leak. So they're
yeah.
just able to, like, it's like they're barely resting on your face. We got a great deal for listeners of the podcast. You can save some money off that sticker price for a pair of Magic 5 goggles, and you actually support this podcast by doing so. So it's a win-win for everybody involved. It's a win for listeners. It's a win for Joel and I. And that is if you go to themagic5.com/the swim brief, you get 15% off. You contribute to this podcast. We really appreciate you guys doing that. For more bite-sized positive psychology content, you can go to Christy_coach on Instagram, CD Swim Coach on Facebook. You can follow the YouTube, Christopher DeSantis YouTube page where these podcasts are uploaded. You can also listen to the Tuesday pod. Usually is one that I record where I just have some positive psychology based content in there. I've got a class that I talked a lot about on this ongoing right now. I'm having so much fun teaching this class. I'm already starting to get interest in a second one. So if you're interested in that, please reach out. Or there's actually a sign up link on my website for that second run of the first class in positive psychology. And gosh, should I miss any plugs, Joel, or did I make it through all of them?
I think you did great.
I think I did great too. You did great, and I appreciate you. Extra long one for the fans this week, and I wonder if we will be back next week. I'll be on vacation. We'll figure out some solution. I think I've banked some podcasts ahead of
All
time
right.
that I'll be able to pull out of the archive for this. So maybe a couple weeks until I see you again, Joel. But until then, thanks, and everybody else, goodbye.
Thank you.